Okay, so you want to own a wedding venue, a barn with string lights, a stone patio overlooking a vineyard, maybe an old estate with a ballroom nobody's danced in since the 80s. You picture a Saturday in June, 200 guests in their best clothes, a band playing, champagne flowing, and a check for $18,000 landing in your account for basically renting out a field and a barn for 8 hours. That's the fantasy. And on the surface, it looks like one of the cleanest businesses in the world. You already own the asset. You're not manufacturing anything. You're not shipping anything. You're just opening a gate and letting people celebrate the best day of their lives on your land. Here's the problem. You are looking at one Saturday in June and assuming it represents the other 51 weekends of the year. The truth is that a wedding venue is not really a hospitality business. It is a business that gets paid enormous amounts of money a handful of times a year and has to survive on that money for months at a stretch. And once you understand that timing problem, everything about how a wedding venue makes money and how it quietly runs out of it starts to make sense. Let's start with what it actually costs to get into this business because unlike a gym or a restaurant, most people who buy into wedding venues think they're buying a building. What they're actually buying is a very specific piece of land with very specific problems attached to it. There isn't one type of wedding venue. There are several, and each one is a different bet on the same underlying question. At the bottom end, you have the working farm venue, someone who already owns agricultural land and converts a barn or a pasture into event space as a side business, usually charging $3,000 to $8,000 for exclusive use of the property. Above that sits the purpose-built venue, the kind constructed specifically to host weddings, with a dedicated reception hall, a bridal suite, and a covered ceremony space, typically running $8,000 to $20,000 per event. Above that, the historic estate or vineyard property, which sells you less of a rental and more of a location, charging $20,000 to $60,000 or more, often bundling in catering exclusivity and lodging. Then there's the urban industrial venue, a converted warehouse or loft space in a downtown core, charging a premium for the aesthetic rather than the acreage. And at the very top, the destination resort venue, the kind that requires a flight to get to, which doesn't sell you a single day at all. It sells you a 3-day weekend package for the couple and every one of their guests. Each of these is a different bet on the same underlying question. Do you make your money from volume, a wedding every weekend at a modest price, or from scarcity, a handful of weddings a year at an enormous price? That single decision shapes every other number in the business. Now here's where the naive mental model breaks down. You think the expensive part is buying the land. It isn't. Not entirely. The expensive part is turning a piece of land into something that can legally hold 150 strangers eating dinner and drinking alcohol at the same time. Zoning is the first wall almost everyone hits. Most agricultural or residentially zoned land is not automatically permitted for commercial event use, and getting a conditional use permit from a county planning board can take 6 months to 2 years. Involve public hearings where neighbors show up specifically to object to noise and traffic, and cost $10,000 to $50,000 in legal and consulting fees before you've hosted a single event. Some counties reject the application outright, and that money is simply gone. Once you clear zoning, you need the infrastructure a farmhouse or a field was never built for. Commercial grade restrooms, because a couple of porta potties will not satisfy a health inspector for a permanent venue, run $30,000 to $150,000. Depending on whether you're building a standalone restroom trailer facility or plumbing a full structure. A commercial kitchen, or at minimum a catering prep kitchen with the right ventilation and grease trap systems, runs another $40,000 to $200,000. Parking is the one nobody budgets correctly. You need enough graded, drained all-weather surface to hold 75 to 150 cars without them sinking into mud after a spring rain. And grading and gravel or paving a lot, that size can run $50,000 to $250,000. And then there's power. A barn built in 1920 was wired for a single light bulb and maybe a radio. It was not wired for a DJ system, a full catering operation running warmers and refrigeration simultaneously, string lights across 2 acres, and a bar running blenders. Electrical upgrades alone can run $20,000 to $80,000. And if you're far from the grid, running new lines to the property can add tens of thousands more. Add the deposit or purchase price of the land itself, the barn or structure renovation, event liability insurance, and a cash reserve to survive your first slow season. And even a modest venue can require $500,000 to over $2 million before you've booked a single wedding. Equipment is the next layer, and it's easy to underestimate. Tables, chairs, linens, a sound system, string lighting, a bar setup, heaters for shoulder season events, and a generator for backup power. A venue hosting 150 guest events needs enough inventory to seat and serve that many people without renting it in every single time, and a full equipment package runs $60,000 to $200,000. Here's the decision that trips people up. Do you provide everything in-house, tables, chairs, linens, bar, or do you rent the bare land and let couples bring in their own vendors for everything? Providing everything feels like the premium play. You control quality, you control the aesthetic in your marketing photos, and you can charge more per event. But it means your cash is tied up in a warehouse full of folding chairs that depreciate every year, whether they're used or not. And it means you're now managing a rental inventory business on top of an events business. Renting the bare land keeps your capital light, but it caps your revenue per event and puts your reputation in the hands of third-party vendors you don't control. Neither option is wrong, but whichever you pick, you've locked in either a large upfront equipment investment or a lower ceiling on what you can charge per wedding. Now, location. This is the decision most first-time venue owners get wrong because they assume a beautiful property is enough. It isn't. A venue's addressable market is largely defined by how far a couple's 150 guests are willing to drive for a single day, which in practice means most bookings come from within roughly a 2-hour radius of a major metro area. Push much further than that and you've shifted from a wedding venue into a destination venue, which requires an entirely different marketing and pricing strategy built around lodging and multi-day packages. Inside that 2-hour radius, the venue also has to sit within a couple's actual planning window, which for the average American wedding runs 12 to 18 months from booking to event date. That means the revenue you generate this year was mostly sold over a year ago, and the revenue you're selling today won't be collected in full until sometime next year. A venue in a beautiful but genuinely remote location can have the best photos on Instagram and still struggle to fill weekends because couples are planning around drive time for their grandparents, not just scenery. Now, we get to the part of this business that explains everything else. The calendar itself. Picture 2 venues, identical in every way, same acreage, same barn, same price point. One books 40 weddings a year. The other books 15. Which one is more profitable per event? It's not necessarily the one with 40. And this is the single most important idea in the entire wedding venue business. Weddings are not evenly distributed across the year. They cluster with brutal predictability into a handful of months. Roughly 80% of weddings in the United States happen between May and October, with September and October now the 2 single most popular months, having overtaken June in recent years. That means a venue's entire annual revenue has to be generated inside a 6-month window, and inside that window, it's further concentrated onto Saturdays specifically. Since Saturday remains by far the most requested day, commanding full premium pricing while Friday and Sunday dates typically sell at a 20% to 40% discount, and weekday dates sometimes don't sell at all without steep concessions. Do the math on what that actually means for capacity. A venue open year-round with 52 weekends has roughly 26 Saturdays that fall inside true wedding season. Subtract a few for holidays, weather closures, and owner maintenance windows, and a realistic ceiling for a single event per day venue is somewhere around 20 to 24 peak Saturdays a year. That is the entire inventory, not 365 days of potential revenue, 22 Saturdays. Every single one of those dates has to be sold at close to full price because there is no way to make up for an empty Saturday in September. You cannot sell it again. Once that date passes unbooked, that inventory is gone forever, permanently, with no way to recover it. This is fundamentally different from a hotel room or a gym membership, where an unsold night or an unused membership still generates something or gets resold eventually. A wedding venue's product expires completely once a week, all season long. This is why deposits and cancellation policies in this industry are so aggressive compared to almost any other event business. A typical venue requires a non-refundable deposit of 25% to 50% of the total contract at booking, often 12 to 18 months before the event, specifically because the venue is taking that date permanently off the market the moment the contract is signed. If a couple cancels 8 months out, the venue has likely lost the ability to rebook that exact Saturday, since most serious couples are already locked into dates for the following season by then. The deposit isn't really a booking fee in the traditional sense. It's compensation for a piece of finite, perishable inventory, that just got taken off the shelf. Industry data on wedding cancellations shows that somewhere around 5% to 10% of bookings fall through before the event, whether from broken engagements, postponements, or financial issues on the couple's side. And every one of those cancellations, if it happens close enough to the date, represents a Saturday, the venue can likely never recover the full value of again that year. There's a seasonal wrinkle here too, similar in spirit to the January rush at a gym, except inverted. Roughly 40% of all wedding bookings for a given year are made during what the industry calls engagement season, the period between Thanksgiving and Valentine's Day, when the highest concentration of proposals happen. Venues that run aggressive promotions and open house events during that window can lock in a huge share of next year's calendar in a compressed 3-month stretch, but that same rush creates a brutal cash flow gap. A venue can book 8 new weddings in January, collect deposits, and then not see the bulk of that revenue, the final payment, typically due 30 to 60 days before the event, for another 10 to 16 months. Owners who spend deposit income as if it were current operating revenue rather than treating it as a liability sitting on the books until the event actually happens run into serious trouble when a slow booking season arrives and there's no fresh deposit money coming in to cover this month's mortgage payment. Now, here's where the psychology becomes as important as the math. Couples booking a wedding venue are, in almost every case, first-time buyers of this specific product, making the single largest discretionary purchase of their lives to that point, under enormous emotional pressure, comparing venues almost entirely on photographs and a single in-person tour. This shapes the entire sales process, a venue's marketing photography, its Instagram presence, and its styled shoots matter disproportionately more than almost any other factor in whether a couple books. Professional photo sessions with a model couple, florals, and full decor donated or heavily discounted in exchange for the images. Venues routinely spend $2,000 to $10,000 on a single styled shoot purely to generate marketing content. Because a couple's decision often comes down to which barn looked more magical in a Pinterest search at 11 at night. And because the purchase is emotional and happens only once, referral and review pressure is intense. A handful of bad reviews about a rude coordinator or a rainy day with no contingency plan can measurably suppress bookings for the following season, in a way that would barely register for a business with repeat customers. Weather is the risk that sits underneath almost every outdoor venue's entire business model, and it is the one variable nobody can control. A venue that sells its primary ceremony space as an open-air lawn or vineyard view is implicitly selling a bet against rain on one specific Saturday, chosen over a year in advance. Most venues handle this with a rain plan, an indoor or covered backup space built into the contract, and the venues that survive long-term almost universally treat that backup space as non-negotiable infrastructure rather than an afterthought. Because a venue without one is one thunderstorm away from a 5-star review turning into a public relations disaster, the couple will describe to every person they know for the rest of their lives. Let's talk about whether a venue built entirely on this concentrated, high-stakes calendar can actually survive, because the honest answer is sometimes not. Consider what happened broadly across the barn and farm venue boom of the 2000s. Land that had struggled to generate meaningful agricultural income suddenly looked like it could be converted into a 6-figure annual business by adding string lights and a gravel parking lot. And thousands of property owners across the country did exactly that. Many of them underestimated the permitting, insurance, and infrastructure costs, opened with minimal restroom and parking capacity, and ran into code enforcement action once neighbors complained about traffic and noise on a residential road. Others took on renovation debt assuming they'd book 30 weddings in year one, only to discover that new venues typically take 2 to 3 full booking cycles to build the reputation and photo portfolio needed to command full pricing, because couples booking 12 to 18 months out are choosing based on a track record the venue hadn't built yet. Several notable venue failures across the country followed the same pattern: undercapitalized, over-leveraged on renovation costs, and structurally unable to survive an off-season with no bookings and a mortgage payment due every month regardless of the calendar. The lesson wasn't that people stopped wanting barn weddings. It was that the math connecting fixed costs to a revenue stream compressed into 20-odd Saturdays a year simply didn't hold for operators who hadn't planned for the gap. So how does a venue actually make money in plain mechanical terms? The core engine is average booking price times number of peak season events minus fixed annual costs. If a venue has fixed annual costs, mortgage or land payment, insurance, utilities, a part-time coordinator, maintenance of around $150,000, and it charges an average of $9,000 per event. It needs roughly 17 bookings a year just to break even. Below that, the venue is losing money. Above it, additional bookings carry strong margins because the marginal cost of hosting one more wedding is far smaller than the price charged. A new venue typically doesn't reach anything close to full calendar utilization in year one. It can take 2 to 3 full seasons to reach a stable, near full peak season calendar, and every one of those early seasons burns through the reserve set aside before opening. If that reserve runs out before word of mouth and review volume build up, the venue can be structurally sound and still run out of cash waiting for its own reputation to catch up to its capacity. This is where secondary revenue becomes essential, and it's the layer with genuinely strong economics. In-house catering exclusivity, requiring couples to use the venue's preferred or in-house caterer rather than an outside vendor, can add $50 to $150 per guest in margin captured by the venue rather than passed entirely to a third party. On-site lodging, converting a farmhouse or building cabins for the wedding party to stay in, adds $2,000 to $8,000 per event, and, more importantly, fills rooms on Friday and Sunday nights that would otherwise sit empty around the Saturday event. Bar service, if the venue holds its own liquor license rather than requiring an outside bartending service, can add another significant margin on top of the base rental. A venue that layers catering, lodging, and bar revenue onto its base rental fee can push total revenue per event from $9,000 to $18,000 or more for the exact same Saturday, exact same guest count, exact same staffing, which is precisely why the most financially resilient venues in this industry are rarely the ones renting bare land. They're the ones that turn themselves into the exclusive vendor for every part of the day. Now let's put this together across a full year, because this is where the two very different versions of this business reveal themselves. In the optimistic scenario, you've secured a location inside a strong metro drive radius, built a photography portfolio that converts inquiries into bookings, layered in catering and bar exclusivity, and reached a stable calendar of around 30 peak season events a year at an average of $14,000 per event, including add-ons. That's $420,000 in gross event revenue against fixed and variable costs of roughly $220,000, leaving a healthy margin that can translate to an owner take home of $150,000 to $200,000 a year, on top of land that continues appreciating in the background. A genuinely strong outcome for the work and capital involved. In the realistic scenario, 2 or 3 ordinary things go wrong. A wet spring pushes back your first full season of bookings by 2 months of lost showing time. A competing venue opens 30 minutes closer to the metro area and undercuts your pricing during your critical second-year reputation building window. A required septic or well repair, the kind rural properties inevitably need, eats $40,000 out of the reserve you'd set aside for marketing. Under those conditions, that same venue can slide from a comfortable calendar of 30 bookings down to 18 or 20. And because fixed costs don't shrink along with the calendar, the difference between those two outcomes in a single year can be well over $150,000. And almost none of that swing shows up as one dramatic event. No fire, no scandal. Just a handful of dates that didn't sell, a slightly slower second season, and a repair bill that arrived at the wrong time, compounding quietly until the number at the bottom of the spreadsheet looks nothing like the plan. So if you do decide to buy or build a wedding venue, remember the one thing that actually determines whether you succeed. It was never really about how beautiful the barn looks in the photos. It's about how well you can survive on 22 Saturdays a year,